Brought to you by PrayLatin.com, makers of prayer cards featuring complete English phonetic renderings of Latin pronunciations.
We are used to hearing about attacks from the secular world on the church. There's an issue in Costa Rica with an attempt to crack open the seal of confession. There's an attempt by the secular authorities to essentially force priests to excommunicate themselves. I will cover that story elsewhere in more detail, but it is a part of a larger problem happening in the Western world right now, and that is arm of government is coming down on the church in Central America, South America, parts of Europe, even in some places in Africa and Asia. This should not surprise anybody paying attention. And that is why we will go here to a story from a Catholic news source. This is not a fire, brimstone, radical traditionalist website or by any stretch of the imagination. And this article will illustrate perfectly what I'm trying to get at here, which is that while this is happening, the church is remaining largely silent on the ramping up of attacks on the church's freedom. Anytime you see in a preconciliar document something positive about freedom of religion, the church is teaching, in its social teaching, is that freedom of religion means that the Catholic Church has the freedom to do the work of the Catholic Church in the world without opposition from the state. It's why the church has always gotten along with governments of all kinds, as long as the church's rights are respected. It's not an endorsement of error, however. Keep that in mind when you hear someone talking about the church and freedom of religion. But we go to Catholic News Agency for this headline. Constitutional Court in Spain forces Catholic Brotherhood to admit a woman. This should be a no-brainer. But the church has numerous lay orders, I think third order religious for men and women, some of them separate, some of them are commingled, as well as religious orders for men and religious orders for women. The church teaches that men and women are equal in dignity before God, but not necessarily in ability and anything else in the real world. It's common sense stuff, at least it was till about a couple years ago. And here you have a story of the secular authorities in Spain, once Catholic Spain, trying to destroy any distinction and forcing it on the church. I'd love to have some of those Catholic media outlets who were getting apoplectic about things that happened Tuesday night to spend at least a little time reporting on this and to do so in a way that actually conforms to basic Catholic sense. Sometimes a National Catholic Reporter reports things in a responsible way. I know a lot of people won't want to hear that, but they sometimes do, because there are things that even across the great divide in the church we can agree on. But in this case, most people in the U.S. are remaining silent. So, from the article, quote, Spain's Constitutional Court, the TC, by its Spanish acronym, has ruled that by refusing to admit a woman, a male Catholic brotherhood violated the legal precept of non-discrimination on the basis of her flesh and her right to association. In 2008, Maria Teresita Laborda Sanz requested to join the Pontifical, Royal, and Venerable Servitude of the Most Holy Christ of La Laguna, a public association of the faithful founded in 1545. Article 1 of the statutes of the Brotherhood states that it is a, quote, religious association of gentlemen, established to promote among its members a more perfect Christian life, the exercise of works of evangelical piety, and the increase of devotion and veneration of the holy image of our crucified Lord, which is why the application was denied. In 2021, the Supreme Court of Spain ruled that Laborda had not suffered any discrimination because, quote, the purposes of the Brotherhood being religious, it did not hold a dominant position in the economic, professional, or labor spheres, so no harm could be caused to the appellant, who could create a new religious association with the same purposes. The Constitutional Court now considers that the content of the Article 1 of the Brotherhood statutes, quote, isn't protected by the religious autonomy of said association to the extent that the prohibition of women from being part of the association is not based on any reason of a religious or moral nature. A November 4th statement from the court explains. The requirements of religious freedom and the principles of religious neutrality not being in question, derived from Article 16 of the Spanish Constitution. The court considers that, quote, although a private association has the right to freely choose whom it associates with, Article 22, this right cannot constitute discrimination based on the flesh when the association holds a privileged or dominant position in the economic, cultural, social, professional field, as the Supreme Court held. However, the Constitutional Court maintained that, quote, although the activities carried out from which the appellant is excluded are acts of religious worship and are not related to any economic, professional, or work-related matters, this does not exclude the possibility that these acts may also have a social or cultural impact. Given that culture and religion, being different elements, are not watertight compartments, and a large number of religious public events in Spain are part of the history and social culture of our country. The court concluded that the plaintiff, quote, has no possibility of carrying out the same activity of veneration of said image in another brotherhood or confraternity of the municipality. The ruling of the 6 judges of the second chamber of the Constitutional Court was not unanimous. And lengthy quote. They're saying she can't do the same stuff by founding her own organization or joining an equivalent women's organization. This is the highest court of the country. Once Catholic Spain. Under this ruling, there's now a precedent. A man could apply to join a women-only secular association. I would say, please try somebody. Please go out and try. But let's be real, the kind of guy who would try something like that is probably not somebody you want in a women's-only order anyway. It would be extremely disruptive and probably dangerous for some of the actual normal members of that lay religious order. That is what they're saying here, though. That we are erasing the distinctions and we're going to force it on the church if we have to. That is the real story today. There's, of course, has been some pushback to this story. So we go back to the article for a shorter excerpt. Quote, Rafael Palomino, a professor of ecclesiastical law at the State of the Complutense University of Madrid, criticized the ruling of the court in a comment published on his professional profile on LinkedIn, calling it, quote, bad news. To the argument of the court that considers a plaintiff has had her rights violated because, quote, she does not have the possibility of exercising the same activity of veneration of said image in another brotherhood or confraternity municipality, Palomino responded, quote, what do you mean she cannot carry out the same religious activity? Let the appellant set up another brotherhood, another association, another religion if she wants. This is beginning to be the inverse of the law presided over by a banana republic constitutional judiciary. Yes, consulted by ACI Prensa, which is a media outlet in Spain, the Diocese of Tenerife declined to comment on the ruling. And quote, the church remains silent during this stuff. Instead, you have priests and media outlets still whinging about and whining about stuff that happened on November 5th. Give me a break. Focus, focus, focus. You priests and media outlets who are all focused on that still should be focused on this. Now, even though many of you, I'm sure, sympathize with the secular courts against the church's authority on this, they are pushing their values on the church. We should take that seriously. They hate religious organizations, especially since they, by their founding, reject secular moral assumptions, including the absolute equality between men and women. Again, the church teaches that men and women are complementary, equal in dignity before God, but otherwise different in numerous and rather obvious ways. And that's the church's claim. And the church says for some things, men and women need their own spaces within the church. Hence why we have convents and abbeys where nuns are and religious women, like monasteries where monks are. And yes, I know sometimes the names can be a little interchangeable at times. They tend to keep monks and nuns away from each other. There's a purpose to that. Within the church is the key to understanding that. See, the secular authorities are pushing their will into the sphere of the church in a country that recognizes a legal distinction between the proper places for the church and state to operate. And those proper spheres, that separation is growing smaller and smaller. They are violating their own secular ideas of the separation of church and state, because of course they are. No one should be surprised by that. Final thought before we wrap this up. If you're a Catholic using the secular courts against the church and its authorities without very, very good reason, like, for example, hiding McCarrick type nonsense, or having been harmed by somebody like McCarrick yourself, if with that exception and maybe a couple other exceptions we could come up with, if you are using the secular courts against the church, you are very much on the wrong side of the spiritual conflicts going on in the world today. Curious what you might have to say about this, so let me know in the comments, please. Are you surprised by any of the things we talked about today? Especially at the end here with the court case in Spain. Let me know what you think about this in the comments, please. So like and subscribe if you haven't. It certainly helps. So does sharing this on social media. It helps too. Please pray for the church and everybody we spoke about today in this. We're not meant here to rile people up against figures in the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.